You there? I have to make sure you guys are still there.
We have an unidentified flying object.
I'm Jack Oswald, and you're listening.
This is Mr. Hammer, and you're listening to...
I'm Richard C. Hoagland, and you're listening to...
I'm Art Bell, and you're listening to Dr. J Radio Live.
We have an unidentified flying object.
Welcome back to another episode of Dr. J Radio Live. Of course, I am your host, Dr. J, and this is truly an international show where it is 7 p.m. right here in the City of Angels, which I have to be honest, it's not very angelic, but nonetheless, I am right here in Los Angeles. On the East Coast, it happens to be 10 p.m., where I hope everybody is staying warm. And for the new UK affiliate, thank you and good morning for accepting our program, where you are awake at 3 a.m. Greenwich Mean Time. As always, we have a super fascinating show for you today. Of course, it's going to be, I think, more extraordinary than what you heard last week. Last week, of course, you heard from Edgar Mitchell again. Great guy. He's getting up there in age, so of course that's why we get as much information from him, but that's only limited. The person that you're about to see or hear from, and you've heard from many times, is what I truly call a revolutionary. Rather than us waiting for POTUS or any other government agency, who most of them don't even know about the USAPs, or better yet known as unauthorized secret access projects. I don't think they can actually give us a disclosure. So what do you do about that? Well, circumvent them, go straight to the people, and open up a direct dialogue with the ET so we can actually join that Federation, the Galactic Federation. And who better to describe everything than the one and only Dr. Stephen M. Greer. Dr. Greer, welcome back.
Thank you. Good to be here.
Let's before I jump into what I wanted to talk about, a lot of people have. I wanted just to quickly talk about what's going to be happening February 26th, 27th, and 28th, right here in Southern California, Palm Springs.
Yes. Well, it's going to be exciting because I've actually never done an entire weekend where the focus is on people developing the science of consciousness, so that they can then become very adept at the remote viewing and understand all the different phenomena that happens when they form their own contact teams. A lot of people don't realize that the way that I got involved with everything, including the Disclosure Project, bringing out the technologies and the information about these covert zero-point and anti-gravity technologies, was because it started as a project as sort of citizens ambassadors to make contact with these civilizations, and that was in 1990. That's 26 years ago, and so that's always been my passion. And I'm a medical doctor, emergency trauma medicine, but before I was a doctor, I was a meditation teacher and a student of the ancient Vedas. And what I learned was that when you begin to talk about or contemplate interstellar communication and travel, you're talking about civilizations that have mastered with the same level of mastery or more than we have mastered electromagnetic signals and cell phones and what have you, the ability to use consciousness interfacing with technology for both communication but also for being able to drop out of linear space-time and travel. So it gets into something most people would relegate to mysticism, but in reality it's a very hard and very physical science. And so what I'm going to try to do over the course of this weekend up near Palm Springs, we're going to be at this place. It's a really wonderful hot springs up in near Palm Springs, is to take everyone through the steps of understanding consciousness, how consciousness can be an unbounded field of awareness, remote view, and make contact with interstellar civilizations, and set up their own contact teams. So that's really the focus of that entire weekend that we're going to be doing at the end of this month.
And now this has already happened globally. This is one thing I love just at the near the end of the movie Sirius. For those of you out there who have yet to see it, you must be living under a rock. But definitely see it, Sirius, Sirius. Also the same name as the website, SiriusDisclosure.com. You had all these people literally from different countries, Brazil, I think China might have been one, maybe it was Japan, I'm not sure. But you had all these people that say, I'm so-and-so from Calgary, Canada, and I'm doing CE5, and all these people that really, Chile was one of them. I just got a posting of that. A lot of people have set this up where you've gone and taught them how to become an ambassador. They become ambassadors as you train them. And when you look at a map where it plots everybody who's practicing, this is truly an international phenomenon. And that's why I think it's so important, because you are instilling back the power to the people.
Well, this is, one of the things that I said to the head of Army Intelligence in 1992 was that you guys have your secret programs, but you cannot control consciousness. You cannot control what the masses do. And I said, ultimately, what we're going to do is create thousands, if not hundreds of thousands and millions of people who understand that these civilizations are there waiting to interact with us if we welcome them. They're not going to force it. There's an inverse relationship between true power and force. So these civilizations understand that. And real power is something that unfolds organically as opposed to something that's coerced or forced. So they understand that our civilization is going from this transition from a nation state and trying to emerge into a global civilization, and that we have to make this larger transformation into an interstellar civilization. Now, a lot of people think that's very futuristic and off in the future, thousands of years. It isn't. The reason they're here now is that they know that we're at this point where we either have to become a peaceful civilization, and not just peaceful on Earth, but peaceful universally. I call it universal peace. Or we're going to terminate, because the technologies don't allow for you to engage in endless war when you're talking about sciences and technologies that have been developed that are more destructive than the hydrogen bomb, actually, that are in classified projects. So these civilizations understand that we're at this crossroads, and that our people have to make this big transformation to a peaceful society, and that we have to then figure out how to build the bridge between our civilization and all these others, of which there are too numerous to count. There's a lot of false information about the ET presence. Obviously, they've been around since the early dawn of history and before, but they know that this time that we're in right now is one of these really quantum moments in history where we can become a civilization that is both enlightened and peaceful and interstellar. So we either go that route, or it's a terminus. It's a shutdown, because you're not going to be allowed to go out in space like the movie Star Wars and just shooting with lasers blazing. I mean, it makes for great science fiction in movies, but in reality, the technologies are so advanced once you cross the nuclear threshold, and once you then go into the trans-dimensional physics of going beyond the speed of light, what I call the crossing point of light, like the crossing point of sound barrier, where there's a crossing point of light barrier. And when you're in that realm, the technologies are so amazing. There's no way that you can survive with the consciousness of violence and destruction. So it really is an existential crisis, but also an existential moment and decision for all of us to decide we're going to go forward as a peaceful civilization into the future, both on Earth and in space. And that's really what the impetus for me forming the whole Close Encounters of the Fifth Kind initiative and the Center for the Study of Extraterrestrial Intelligence. That then grew into the Disclosure Project, because it became very clear that, for example, in 1992, we went out on a beach in Florida with 50 people for a weekend, and 4 of these extraterrestrial vehicles literally materialized in the sky in front of us. And it was seen by everyone, and it was on the front page of the local paper in Pensacola. And what happened at that point is that we began to have so much military interference and so many people from government And eventually, of course, after Bill Clinton was elected, a friend of Clinton's and also of the CIA director for Bill Clinton approached me and said, look, they're trying to figure out what's going on with this UFO stuff. Will you do a briefing for them? So that began the whole Project Starlight, which has been mistakenly called the Rockefeller Initiative. It wasn't. It was the CSETI Project Starlight that Lawrence Rockefeller took an interest in to support it because he wanted to end the secrecy, although his brother, David Rockefeller of Chase Manhattan Bank, did not. All the conspiracy kooks go, oh, well, the Rockefellers, you're working with. I said, no, they're not all the same. There are good and bad people in every family and society. So Lawrence wanted to see the secrecy end and wanted to see us make peaceful contact with these civilizations. And Lawrence Rockefeller was the one who said, look, you lead this and I'll be in the background playing a support role. But that is how the Disclosure Project evolved, because we realized that there weren't any politicians who had the guts to do anything with it, that we had to do it. And so we did the Disclosure Project in 2001 and continue to bring out disclosure information. I don't know, Dr. J, if you saw in November, we did a December 4-hour workshop on the national security state. And just to correct you, they're unacknowledged special access projects, USAPs.
Not right. Sorry. Yes.
Unacknowledged special access projects, and are the ones that are way beyond what people think they found on Hillary Clinton's computer, which were special access projects. There are a lot of special access. The unacknowledged ones, the key word is unacknowledged. They're off the books. They're not being supervised by Congress and the President, and they are a runaway train. And those have been going on since the 40s and 50s, but have really become a force of destructive secrecy over the last 30 or 40 years. And that's why Eisenhower in 1961 said, beware the military-industrial complex. So the Disclosure Project and the efforts to expose the fact that the secrecy, a lot of it, is not all of it, but a lot of it is centered around keeping the technologies away from the public because, look, we don't need oil, we don't need the petrodollar, we don't need utilities, we don't need coal-fired power plants. And I always say to folks who are in Silicon Valley and other high-tech centers, there is no high-tech sector in our society. High-tech would be the stuff that Tesla and other geniuses were trying to bring forward in the 20s and 30s and 40s and 50s. So we're your smartphone is still using radio signals like the first telegram sent from Marconi in 1844. So you're still dealing with a really very crude, backward, almost caveman level of science and technology on our planet compared to what is known and exists on this planet. So that began to be something that we had to deal with, but always the heart of what the project has been about is taking this to the people. And, you mentioned that you can, if you go to our site, which is SiriusDisclosure.com, SIRIUS disclosure.com, all one word, you will see that there is an app that's a free app that you can download that will allow you to join other people on these contact teams all over the world. And when you zoom out, you'll see that virtually every single country in the world now have these teams and people doing it. And it's amazing how many people. We launched that 2 years ago, and it's just grown by exponential orders of magnitude. And there's also a training app. There's an app there that is available on iTunes and also the Google for Android, where it goes through an entire course in meditation and contact, and actually has your smartphone will be converted into a magnetic field detector, so that if a craft is approaching or is nearby, it'll start signaling, even if it's not in the visible spectrum. And we'll talk about this in a moment. So I think this is why, what we try to put out there is enough information so people can do this on their own, quite independent of me. I mean, I always tell people my goal is to make myself unnecessary. And let's face it, I'm not getting any younger. When I started this effort, I was 35. I'm 60 now. So my own view of this is that we really need to hand this off to the next generation and get people to pick up this torch of contact and peaceful contact and disclosure and free energy. And the best way to do it is to decentralize it. is to put it out there. And so this weekend up in the desert of California is really going to be this really immersion weekend of meditation training, remote viewing training. People have the mornings off to practice the protocols and then be in the hot springs or whatever they want to do. And so it's going to be Friday night, Saturday, and Sunday until about 6 o'clock on Sunday. And so this also, by the way, people can see it by webinar. If you can't travel to that part of California, you can see it online. The entire thing is going to be broadcast online. So, I encourage people to do that because it will be just a really immersion experience where people can deepen their ability to meditate and also to do the remote viewing and the close encounters of the fifth kind protocol. Because when you start asking the big question, how are these civilizations traveling beyond the speed of light? What does that mean? How would they appear if their resonant frequency is beyond the speed of electrons and matter, but they're right outside your house? Would you see them? No. Would you sense them? Yes. How will you sense them? What electronics will help? What conscious techniques would help? What detectors that are available on the market will help? I'm going to have all this stuff there. So it's a very technical area in a lot of ways, but it's also a very meditative course. So this is to do. I've actually never tried to put so much information in a 2.5-day period, Friday night, Saturday, and Sunday. But I think it's going to be important for people who want to be there or see it by webinar because it'll help them get to the next level of their capabilities. Because my argument has always been, I used to talk to Ingo Swann about this, who was a very famous remote viewer. I did a lot of stuff with the military, and I was up at his home in New York some years ago, and he said, look, everyone has this ability, they just don't develop it. And I really honestly believe that. I think this is your birthright as a human being, to be able to be in this state of higher consciousness, to remote view both the present and the future and the past, if you wish, make these contact events happen, and become sort of this a spirit warrior, a very enlightened spirit warrior, like the Shambhala tradition. And I think this is something everyone has the capabilities of, and it's a very big mistake to look to gurus or certain people and say, well, they have the ability and I don't. The truth is, it's like when you look at someone, I like bodybuilding and working out at the gym and stuff, and you don't start bench pressing 400 pounds the first day you go in there. You build up that capability over time, and you do it naturally without drugs. So there's a great corollary to, I'm really into fitness and bodybuilding, but there's a corollary to developing these mental capabilities and physical development. So I always encourage people to say, look, you can do it by virtue of the fact you're a human being and you're awake. And so if you're awake, you can become aware of just the quiet state of awareness and then go into these other dimensions and make contact. And most of the reason why people don't is that they don't believe they can. And if it's like anything, Dr. J, if you say I can't do it, you won't. If I had said I couldn't put a chest tube in someone's chest who was bleeding out from a car wreck, I wouldn't be able to do it because I would talk myself out of it. So most people, you have to take a positive attitude and say, if Ingo Swann was doing this or whoever is doing this, I can do it. And that I think that this is really important, that people own their own power and abilities. And I hear a lot of people in a very defeatist way. And so what I want to do with this weekend is give people the techniques and tools, but also teach them that they can, in fact, do this. And then they go out under the stars with 3 or 4 or 5 people, and you'll be amazed at what happens if you actually do it. Go out there and try it, and just turn off the computer and get out in front of off the TV and turn off Netflix. Well, unless you're looking at Sirius. Sirius went to number 1 on Netflix.
I was going to say yes.
It went to number 1 documentary on Netflix, and this is a little indie film that I want to thank all your listeners who helped support that film, because it was the biggest crowd-funded documentary in history. It had no advertising or marketing budget, and it still went to number 1 on Netflix, and it's been seen all over the world. So it's very, very exciting. I have a big announcement to make on your show for the first time. We're going to do a follow-on to the film Sirius this year. So stay tuned. We're going to be probably announcing this in the next month or two, the details, because what we're going to do is do a massive disclosure and secret government expose documentary that we hope to roll out as a September-October surprise right before the election.
I'm actually really glad you brought up, first of all, a few things. The app, the ET Contact tool. I think it's got a lot of, first of all, it's one of my favorite apps because of all the capabilities that it has in there. It turns your smartphone, for instance, I'm not sure if everyone's aware of this, but every smartphone is a gyroscope. That's why they're developing drones that can be actually flown just with your smartphone. It's got a built-in compass. Right. And so you have the magnetometer, the compass. What I like are the tones taken straight from crop circles. Now, before I got to come back to this this field of questioning, but there's an elephant in the room that people are writing me about that I have to address. X-Files. It's been dormant for quite some time. Then they come out with this six-part one-off. There's just this, and so episode 1 was using terminology that could only be attributed to your research. ARVs, the only time, and I've been paying attention to this phenomenon for almost 32 years now, and so to hear the word ARV, to hear the words alien abduction is not really happening, that it's done by the secret government, by actual human beings, and they're blaming it on aliens, and just so much stuff that would have come if Chris Carter or whoever else was involved was paying attention to you.
Well, yeah, they've studied our work for many years, and back in the 90s, during the original show, there was a very well-known director named Arnold Kopelson who was at Fox, who was given a $60 million discretionary budget to do any movie in the world he could do, that anything he wanted to do. And he flew me out to meet with him and a lot of the writers, the people who worked with the X-Files, because what they wanted to do was a nonfiction, true movie based on what we had uncovered. Now, I told him that I didn't think Fox would let him do that. It had to be a fiction because they don't want to expose their masters in the mainstream media, and particularly their interests that are tied into the financial and oil sector at Fox and these other big media companies. And he says, no, I'm one of the most famous directors in Hollywood. I've had billions of dollars in sales. And he assured me he had complete discretion over this $60 million fund to do any movie he wished to do, and he wanted to do this movie, which would not be like the X-Files. It would be a true story based on real research and real experiences, not only CE5s in Contact, but all the stuff we were doing with Project Starlight before the Disclosure Project even happened. This was in 1997. He actually sent his main administrative assistant to the congressional briefings in Washington that we did for members of Congress in the White House in April of 1997. Now, a couple weeks later, I get a call from them, and Arnold Kopelson goes, Dr. Greer, we can't do this film. And I said, well, Arnold, what do you mean? You thought you had complete control. And I was kind of laughing inside because I told him that I didn't think they'd let him. And he says, no, I can't make this one, not if it's true. So the default, so think about how the intelligence community works. They want to fictionalize the things that are true so people don't know the difference between science fiction and science fact. And so the X-Files property has taken a lot of this information, which I have freely made available to the public. It's not like there's any secret channel. There's not, except those meetings I had back in the 90s. And those weren't secret. I mean, it was just, they were the development meetings at Fox headquarters at Century City. But what you find is that, and I don't know quite how to interpret what's going on with the current X-Files series because it's clearly reflecting my research. However, are they doing it to neutralize what we're going to do in a true documentary? So people will say, well, that documentary is just based on X-Files stuff. You see what I'm saying? Yeah. Or are they doing it to actually get the word out? I'm afraid it's the former and not the latter. In other words, you have to think about how the intelligence community works. They want to neutralize and stay ahead of where you're moving. And the best way to do it, and the way this has been done for years, all the way back to 1953, I have a CIA document that explicitly talks about putting Disney Studios under contract to do cartoons about flying saucers and little green men to make this subject an item of ridicule and levity, but not serious inquiry and science. So it sets up a distraction. So whether or not, what the motives are behind this X-Files series, I don't know. But I'm cognizant of the intelligence community's ability to very subtly, in psychological warfare programs, put out something as a fiction so it neutralizes the fact. Does this make sense to you?
Yes.
So
yes.
It's very, now this is a very nuanced analysis I'm giving you, and I hope I'm not being vague, because I can't tell you that for sure I know one way or another. But my concern is that they put so much accurate information in there that then when the truth comes out, people say, oh, well, that's not really true. We saw that in the X-Files. It's all just based on that. When it was originally put out by the research we found, that's 100% true. So it could be a way of neutralizing a factual disclosure by doing an entertainment fiction that contains elements that are very, very, very much the same, including the terminology. So is it art imitating life or life imitating art? And what is the agenda behind that? If I sound suspicious, it's because I've been around the bush for 26 years on this. And I've seen how the big media conglomerates try to neutralize something through movies and through TV shows that's 100% real, but by making it a fiction, it kind of takes the steam out of it. You see what I'm saying? So it's a very, so who knows? I mean, certainly they're aware of my work. I mean, I've met with many of the writers who were on the original X-Files and whatnot in Arnold Copelson's office there at Fox headquarters and at Century City in Los Angeles. But I think that this is why we have been trying, actually, and we have a script. If anyone's listening right now, we have a script to do a full-length feature film that would be like Close Encounters of the Third Kind or E.T., but 100% of the things that would happen in it would be based on a true story, like Argo or Bridge of Spies that just came out this past year that Spielberg did. We have that script, and we would like to do it if somebody wants to do it as an independent film. But because I think it's very important for the public to begin to understand what the truth is as opposed to the fiction, because often the truth gets lost in these fictionalized portrayals. Now, another disclaimer, I have never seen an episode of the X-Files, and I know your listeners are probably now astonished. I don't have time to look at TV and stuff like that. And if it's fiction, I never look at it because I think the truth is so much more interesting than the fiction. I find fiction really boring. But so that's just my own bias. I mean, I go to bed reading The Economist and The New Republic and The Week and journals and Scientific American or whatever. But I'm not one to be looking at fictional things. But I think that the intelligence community and the media are so hand in hand. I don't know if they're preparing people for the truth and they're friendlies trying to get the truth out through this, or if they're trying to neutralize what we're planning to do this year. You see, so do they know what we're planning to do? Of course. There's no way I can send an email or have a conversation without it being monitored.
Yeah.
And that's not being paranoid. It's just I've had it proven to me. Therefore, the question is, what is the impetus for this series? Certainly, a lot of what I have heard, although I didn't see these episodes, conform with the truth.
Yes.
But what is the agenda behind it? That is what I'm agnostic about. I don't know. I'm sort of I don't know which way I'm going to fall on that. We'll see how it goes forward into the future. But look, I mean, a lot of folks like this have watched the work we're doing. I mean, George Lucas has, Steven Spielberg has, Chuck Russell, who did What Dreams May Come, has actually been out in the desert with me doing CE5 work and Contact. There's a lot of people in the media who are very, very interested in this, you can imagine. Many of the rock bands like Blink-182. I mean,
yeah.
Tom DeLonge.
Tom DeLonge, yeah. Yeah.
And he stayed at my home here.
And he also
And-
brought you
and
out
so-
to California, didn't he?
Oh, yes, and we were out in Joshua Tree racing around within a big thing where they were shooting one of their music videos, and he had me on the stage with him at a number of the Blink-182 huge concerts when they were filling massive arenas. So, there are a lot of artists and people who are genuinely interested, but, there's also a thread of when something is so true and they portray it as a fictional thing, I don't know if that's helpful or not. And what I would like to do, if you were asking me, is let's do this year another documentary that blows the lid off the secrecy, that's really focused on, if you go to our YouTube channel, which is youtube.com/sdisclosure, S as in the letter S, Steve, or
For serious, yeah.
S-disclosure, for serious, S-disclosure. You will see that this entire 4-hour expose I did in Washington a couple months ago in November is up there. And by the way, it was on multiple pirated sites, and it's had about 2 million views already. But it goes through in excruciating details exactly what you're telling me is in this first episode of the X-Files, which is I find very interesting. But I didn't have any role in consulting with or a direct contact with those folks. I just know that they follow what we're doing.
I have that fear that you actually mentioned of the neutralization, and the reason being exactly what you found, that 1953 CIA document. This country has endured more ridicule on this topic than any other country out there.
Yep.
And a good disinformation campaign will take bits of truth and surround them by false. And usually
right.
the bits of truth they'll take is the most extreme. And so you're right. When this comes out for real later in a real legitimate documentary, or like you said, a fully scripted film that's based on the truth, like you mentioned Argo or Bridge of Spies with Tom Hanks, which came out fairly recently, then you're absolutely right. People are going to say, oh, I already saw that on the science fiction X-Files. So I don't know if it's going to help. I know a lot of people.
I mean, we'll see.
Yeah.
But, the thing is that in a sense, it's good to put the information out there, even if it's fictionalized. One could argue. On the other hand, there is this more nuanced psychological warfare spin, because I know for a fact that the CIA has been involved in this kind of chicanery for over 60 years. This is an uncontested. By the way, after I personally briefed the head of the CIA, I got a whole tranche, an entire big box of documents, of which this was one. Another one is a document that names Professor Condon of the famous
Condon Report, yeah,
at the University of Colorado, that was authorized by the Air Force to study UFOs, and was then concluded there was nothing to it, which gave a fig leaf to the Air Force to shut down Project Blue Book and pretend nothing was there. I have a document that names Professor Condon, chairman of the Condon Committee, that shut down Air Force investigations into UFOs in the late 1960s, and it says it cannot be known by the public that Dr. Condon, the professor, is on our payroll, because it would ruin his legitimacy as an impartial scientist. I have another document that says virtually the same thing about Professor Menzel at Harvard, who was the big debunker of UFOs and extraterrestrial visits back in the 50s and 60s and 70s. So I have another document, and these are ones that have the provenance of being sent directly to me from the agency, from the CIA. So when I say this is not a conspiracy theory, this is how the intelligence community really does work. So wake up and smell the coffee.
I'm glad you brought up Dr. Condon from the infamous Condon Report now, because he was stated, even though you have documents confirming that he's on payroll along with Menzel, who publicly wrote these debunking books, but yet he was on the payroll, for the NSA, if not, like you said, the secret the CIA, the Central Intelligence Agency. Nonetheless, though, Professor Condon, stated that a few months before the report was to be released, something to the effect of that I've already made up my mind, or there's nothing to this, but I'm not supposed to say that till later, which right away off the bat indicates you're not even doing what you're supposed to do publicly.
Well, no, and he was on the payroll the whole time. This is my point. And now what's interesting, we have a disclosure project with this. Dr. Robert Woods of McDonnell Douglas Aerospace that merged with Boeing some years ago. And old man McDonald of McDonnell Douglas, the founder of McDonnell Douglas, had asked Dr. Woods to look into UFOs and propulsion systems, anti-gravity, and he began to do a serious study. And then he was on the committee with Dr. Condon, but because he had found real evidence and was convinced it was legitimate scientific evidence, Dr. Condon went to the head of McDonnell Douglas, Mr. McDonald himself, and begged Mr. McDonald to fire Dr. Woods, because Dr. Woods, being on the committee, was presenting all this hard, real evidence, and it didn't conform with what Dr. Condon was ordered to do by the CIA. Luckily, McDonald did not fire Dr. Woods, but Dr. Woods was kicked off the committee. So they sanitized the committee of legitimate aerospace scientists that had all this evidence. And that is also in the Disclosure Project archives to anyone who wants to drill down and look at them. So that is the truth. And this is why, people say, well, that's ancient history. I said, no, it's still going on today. Do you really think that this is the biggest secret in the history of the human race? The technologies would completely replace hundreds of trillions of dollars of earth-destroying fossil fuel and nuclear power rubbish. Do you really think that they're not going to try to penetrate everything they can? They have, and they continue to. So this is why I tend to be rather suspicious.
In the movie series, one thing that I greatly admired from Michio Kaku is his labeling of the different civilizations, where he said, we, human beings living on Earth, are a type 0 civilization.
Yeah, we're at level 0.
Yeah,
right.
Because we're doing nothing but using fossil fuels, dead animals and trees, for powering things. And going back to the technology, I was talking to someone and he mentioned, why are we still burning stuff, that's 150-year-old technology? I said, that's not 150-year-old. What do you think the Chinese were doing 1,000+ years ago to send up rockets? They were burning chemicals to send them up. Why are we using that technology? Just like when you mentioned, we have all these capabilities of our smartphone. On the other hand, it's using what Marconi was using 140 years ago. This is
well, and you're charging your smartphone and your computer off a fossil fuel power grid, or at the best, solar and wind, which of course is so expensive, and the energy density, as they call it, the amount of energy you get out of it is so small for what it costs, that it's never going to stay ahead of what's going on in China and India. By the way, India now and New Delhi is the most polluted city in the world, worse than Beijing. So I think that this begins to bring up the other issue. What we want to do in this next film, I'm going to put out a call now. Anyone can contact us if you look at the toolbar at SeriousDisclosure.com. If you have direct, not indirect hearsay, but direct personal knowledge of covert programs dealing with UFOs, zero-point energy, this kind of subject, get hold of us if you're willing to come forward and be in this next film. Because what we want to do is put the best of the best forward and launch this in the middle of, in September, October timeframe, if we can do it. It's a very aggressive schedule, but that's what we're hoping to do. We'll see. I mean, I'm sort of announcing this on your show to let people have a heads up. And by the way, if they want to find out what's going on with that, there's a free newsletter and email list we have at our website. You just put your email address in, and we'll give you all these updates. But we really feel like this needs to be the focus because there's no one talking about these issues. Although, as you know, Hillary Clinton was asked about UFOs in a New Hampshire newspaper article back about a month ago, And she said, yes, I mean, we may have already been visited, and if I become president, I'll look into it. And as you know, the chairman of her campaign is John Podesta, who, when he left the Obama White House, said his biggest regret of being in government was that he hasn't been able to effect disclosure on the UFO issue. But this is, this gets into the whole question of what you mentioned earlier at the beginning of the hour, is who actually are in these unacknowledged special access projects. And even if they know a little bit about this, say you're a president or you're a congressman or a senator, how much can you do about it without risking life and limb or imprisonment? I think this gets into the whole question of, has our democracy been completely subverted? And has there been a quiet coup d'etat?
I'm afraid it has, though. So honestly,
I know that it has. I know for a fact there's been a silent coup d'etat that has not been acknowledged. It's an unacknowledged coup d'etat. So this is one of the real problems, and I don't think that's going to change, except that we get people who have the courage to defect from the system because they understand that the system that they're in is illegal. And therefore, they can come forward with impunity. And this is very different from Snowden or the WikiLeaks stuff, because we're talking about programs that are completely being run in a criminal fashion. And since we can prove this in a court of law, the people who defect from Lockheed Martin Skunk Works or from my uncle's old company, Northrop Grumman, or SAIC there in La Jolla, or EG&G, or any of these other military or intelligence programs with documents, material, information, whatever, they do not have to fear prosecution, because what we established in 1997-98 was that the programs were illegal. Therefore, anyone that comes out with any information is protected, because the programs being illegal can't then cite the National Security Act to shield themselves. They've opted out of the system. They have to live with that. So that's one of the things that I point out to not only politicians, but to also the military and intelligence people who come forward with us information. I was just texting someone today who's one of my whistleblower sources in the intelligence community that he's trying to get an Air Force Office of Special Investigations guy with a top-secret TSI, SCI Special Compartment Intelligence clearance, who knows about the tracking of a massive ET objects out in our solar system, and also apparently they've gone around behind the moon. And there's one person who called into a radio show who was anonymous. I said, look, we don't care about an anonymous source. It's got to be name, rank, serial number, your DD-214 if you were in the military, something that proves. The only reason that we require that is that if it's hearsay or someone's not identified, it has no credibility. The exception to that would be if there were 2 or 3 people who knew very well a credible figure and also had documentation from that figure who knew it secondhand and could corroborate it. The other thing we require for anyone listening is that if you say that you teleported to Mars and back, you better have something, other corroborating people. In other words, the wilder your story is, the more we're going to require that there be some corroboration, and it's not a one-off, because we don't want to be caught in a sting where we're putting out something that's hoax. And believe me, there are people who try to pull hoaxes on us all the time, and I'm not 100%, no one is, but we want to be very, very careful. But I'm saying that if you have legitimate information that's firsthand, reach out to us. And you know what? All these dozens of people who came forward in the Disclosure Project and the big National Press Club event in Washington in 2001 and who have come forward since then, no one has been threatened and no one has been harmed. Why? Because we have a security system of our own.
And power in numbers, too.
Yeah, we have powers in numbers, but we have a security system of our own. And it's a very dangerous thing for anyone in these covert programs to get in our way. I will just say that. It's very, very risky for them because it will blow back on them. and I mean really big. So, and legally, there's really nothing that can be done because we can prove. Because it's not like I'm one of these, a UFO researcher who hasn't been there. I mean, I've been the guy who's actually been with the head of the Defense Intelligence Agency and the head of the CIA and members of the Senate. It's not like, I'm claiming to be somebody I can prove this, have letters, I have documents. And if those folks were being lied to and deceived, then that's proof of a criminal operation, because we can prove the operations are going forward, but the people who are supposed to be overseeing them are being lied to and deceived. That in and of itself is treason. So you want to spend the rest of your life in Leavenworth or
That's right.
Get in my way on this. And I actually said that to the head of Army Intelligence once. You don't want to just stand aside, get the hell out of the way. I mean, you may not support what we're doing, but don't get in the way of it. Because if you do, we'll be able to prove that you're part of this criminal enterprise, and you'll spend the rest of your life in Leavenworth Federal Penitentiary. So I think that people have to begin to get some courage here, because we're not only on the right side of history and the right side of the angels, we're on the right side of the law here.
Yes. Yes. Actually, I have a written question, but before I do that, we have two persistent callers, and I figured I might as well let them through, even though I told people wait till after break. It's okay. Nonetheless, I want to go with in order. Area code 952. What's your name? Where are you calling from?
Hi, my name is Betsy, and I'm calling from Minnesota.
Hi. Do you have a question for Dr. Greer or comment?
Yes, I do. Do you believe in interdimensional beings, not as such aliens, but as like jinn and other beings like that? That's my question.
It's a great question, yeah. Well, whether jinn, I mean, I don't, there are different terminologies. I mean, it's a great question, because there's a whole lot of what I call cosmological confusion or indigestion. And I'll tell you a little funny story. When I was at the Vatican with Monsignor Balducci, who was a senior theologian to the Pope,
yes,
John Paul, and I was at his apartment overlooking the Basilica and all this. And he said, look, he says, angels, or demons for that matter, don't need flying saucers, and they don't need spacecraft.
That's right.
And he said, people confuse. Now, are there other dimensions that are not ET, but are real? Absolutely, I know that's to be the case. I mean, I had a near-death experience when I was 17 and went across on the other side, and I saw this. So I think that, however, what has happened in the so-called metaphysical and UFO and alternative community is to sort of throw them all into the same category, when in reality there are very clear distinctions. So it's like a set and a subset, if you understand mathematics. So let's say if you're an interstellar civilization, you're going to be both physical and have spacecraft and physical bodies and a physical planet, but you're also going to be trans-dimensional or interdimensional, because you have got to figure out how to go beyond the speed of light. And when you go through the crossing point of light, you enter into what used to be called the near astral, or into this other energy field and other dimensions. Now, you could also be beings, intelligent beings, that are completely in that form and are not physical. They don't need spacecraft. Just like when you have a lucid dream or an astral body experience where you fly, and this has been done since the early human history. I've had it happen many times where I've lifted up out of my body and gone places. That is your subtle body that is not physical as in electrons and neutrons and protons, but it's still real. But but there are beings, both who have passed out of the physical world and others that have evolved, like in the so-called angelic realm, that actually reside in other dimensions in toto, totally reside there and don't have physical planets and physical bodies. Now, to make things more confused, those beings, on occasion, can create phenomenon that interact with this dimension. So that's where poltergeist comes from. So what people have to understand, and one of the things I'm going to be teaching this weekend at the end of the month, the 26th and 27th and 28th up in Palm Springs, is discernment and experience so that you understand, is this phenomenon related to something extraterrestrial or something that's purely residing in an interdimensional or transdimensional realm? Or is it your great-grandmother trying to contact you? I mean, I think that this is really, really important, and your question is so excellent because it isn't talked about in the UFO subculture much, and what happens is that it becomes very confusing to people because everyone wants to say that anything that goes bump in the night is extraterrestrial, but it isn't. Because we have we have an enormous multiverse. This universe has multiple dimensions, too numerous to even count. And there are intelligent life forms that some have physical bodies, some don't. And so there's all kinds of phenomena, not one phenomenon.
Absolutely.
And that's what's so exciting about this. I mean, this is a whole area of science and study that needs to come out of the shadows so that people really understand. And by the way, I will tell you, there's no way to be an ambassador to these interstellar civilizations without understanding this cosmology. And back in the mid '90s, I wrote a paper. It's in my first book. That Thomas Jane and other actors I've met, that is their favorite book, because it goes really deep. And the paper, the research paper, is called Extraterrestrial Intelligence and the New Cosmology. And it goes into all of these differentiations and distinctions that need to be understood, so that it doesn't break down into just sort of a mush of mythology. And so there's discernment that people have. And this also gets into the question, a lot of people have an experience that they will call it paranormal, and they'll think it was with an ET, when in reality it was from a being from another dimension. And people have asked me how many dimensions, and I've people have asked me, how many dimensions are there? I said, how many numbers are there between 0 and 1 and infinity?
Infinite, right?
Okay, there's virtually, because we're talking about resonant field shifts. Now, this gets into really esoteric stuff, but just like you can take an electromagnetic spectrum and just shift it subtly and get different radio stations around the dial, you can look at the whole cosmos that way. So we think of the universe as this material thing, which in reality, even the material universe is infinite. They're going to find this out sooner or later. But then there are these other dimensions enfolded within it, each of them being infinite. So it's infinity within infinity within infinity within. It's like a fractal that goes on forever. It's absolutely astonishing. So the diversity and the kinds of experiences that can be had are amazing. And however, to someone who lacks the knowledge and discernment, it can be very, very confusing. And I think what's happened a lot in paranormal and UFO research is that things get lumped all together because there's not a clear, discerning understanding of exactly the impetus behind your question, which was just a wonderful question, by the way.
I have more. Betsy, so much thank you for calling and for being persistent. I was going to wait till the second hour, but nonetheless, I'm glad you brought that up. Thank you. Okay, let's go to, this is 717. Welcome to the show. Where are you calling from and your name, please?
Rancho Cucamonga, California, and it's Lou Sheehan. And Dr. Greer, I'm calling in to just say kudos. I've so rarely hear, if I've ever heard anyone else say that this is criminal behavior on the part of these rogue employees. I'm just, it's such a refreshment to hear this, because so many people seem to imply that these agencies are set up to circumvent the Constitution, to avoid the normal, natural democratic process, and they just get whatever funding they want and they don't tell anybody about it. I really think, again, these are rogue employees who don't tell people what they're really doing with the money.
Oh, no, and I know this for a fact. You know, when I was meeting with the head of the Defense Intelligence Agency, General Patrick Hughes, you can Google him, I'm in his office. He's telling me he very much now suspects there are things going on with UFOs and ETs in the Defense Intelligence Agency, which there were, because we have Disclosure Project witnesses who were in those compartmented operations. But he wasn't being told anything. He was being lied to. And when I turned to the general and I said, sir, these are criminal elements, and there are people on your senior staff who are read into those projects who are lying to you. There was a colonel across the table from me in his conference room who visibly stiffened. And my military advisor and I later compared notes and said, that guy is the gatekeeper lying to the general. So people have to understand that, your high school civics lesson of, how our society is structured and all is right with the law and we're a nation of laws and God is in his heaven and all is right with the world. This is a myth. And I take no pleasure in saying this. My mother's family were some of the original founders of the United States, and my dad was half Cherokee Indian. So, my roots in this country go back very far, but it has gone so far amiss, and it's time to call a spade a spade. And the reason it's important to is that there are actually some very good people who have just gone through the ranks, who have no idea they're involved in illegal operations because they're not there to question authority. What I'm saying is they need to start questioning the authority of their security clearances and who's telling them to keep this secret, because those people are actually committing treason. Now, there was a colonel some years ago who publicly said I was a traitor to America and I was committing treason. And I said, oh, no, and if you want to take this further, we'll take it to court and see who's going to win. Because, when you have people who are at the apex of our government, who are supposed to be in the control and supervision of these operations, who are being not just not told something, but deliberately lied to when they make a pointed inquiry. That is what happened to Clinton. That is what's happened to Obama. It's what happened to Podesta. It's what happened to the CIA.
Carter? President Carter?
Carter,
President Carter
absolutely.
as well?
I have it on very good authority that President Carter, from multiple independent sources, demanded to know stuff about UFOs because he ran on ending secrecy because he was the governor of Georgia and had a UFO sighting. I actually have his report form of the sighting. And he was told by outgoing CIA director Bush, George W. Bush's dad, the elder Bush, that he said, I won't tell you anything. And if you want to find out about it, go ask the Congressional Research Service. Basically blew off the incoming president of the United States.
Which is improper. That's improper. Go ahead.
Well, no, it's illegal. It's a complete subversion of that's treason.
Oh, that's what I want to hear, because so many people do not get that.
Here's a really important thing, and I'm glad you brought this up. People who want to come forward need to know that not only are they not going to be violating any law, they're going to be true patriots to not only the United States but to humanity by doing so.
I agree.
It is an act of enormous patriotism to come forward and expose this kind of criminal chicanery. And I think
I just want to say kudos. Kudos to you,
thank
because
you.
so many people do not understand this. And I hope you get that word out. And I didn't mean to interrupt you, but I just want to make sure you understand that I really appreciate what you're saying. So.
Yeah, no, I do, and I appreciate your support. It's controversial, the position I've taken, but I think that it's based on facts. And I have to say, I didn't start out this way. Look, I'm a doctor, and yes, my uncle worked designed the lunar module and all that, but I didn't know how this system worked, and it was only through the school of very hard knocks, and I actually went through it being pulled, kicking and screaming in disbelief that, in fact, when I got the FedEx from the man setting up my briefing for the director of the CIA, and he said, they've made inquiries and are being told nothing about this, and you're going to be the first person to brief the Clinton administration and the CIA director on this, that they were being deceived. I thought that was certainly a lie. But if that had happened one time, I would say, well, it was just they didn't want those particular. It's happened over and over and over and over and over and over again, and not just in the United States. When I met with Lord Hill Norton, who was head of the Ministry of Defense, he told me the exact same story. That he was never told the truth about any of this, even though he was head of the Ministry of Defense, and as such was head of MI5 and MI6. So this kind of compartmentalization, when it reaches the level of such secrecy that it undermines the rule of law, that is then criminal. And that's what Eisenhower warned us about. And a friend of mine some years ago knew the Jackie Gleason family, and they said, yes, Eisenhower bemoaned to the day he died to the Gleasons that he was actually, he knew all this ET and UFO stuff was real, that he initially knew a fair amount about it, and then he increasingly was being shut out of all operations. And that was the genesis of his famous Beware the Military-Industrial Complex speech when he left office in January of 1961. So, you know, this is not something that went out of control in the 90s. This has been out of control between the end of World War II and 1954, those 9 years. In 1954, October, is when we mastered gravity control. So in other words, we haven't needed airplanes since 1954, or cars, or roads, or surface roads. And I have people who have been in the vault and have seen the documentation that proves this. So this begins to explain how the secrecy became so compartmentalized that even a five-star general and Republican president like Eisenhower would be pushed aside. And, you know, Senator Barry Goldwater, I'm sitting in his living room in Paradise Valley, he told me the exact same thing. And I said, well, you know, because he was on armed services, he was on every committee. He basically, John McCain took his seat there. And he says, yeah, they wouldn't tell me a goddamn thing. He said, and every other word was a cuss word. He was hilarious, Senator Goldwater. And this guy was no kind of leftist liberal. I mean, he was like the father of the conservative movement in the Republican Party in the 60s. But he was horrified that this information had become so tightly held that he could not find out anything about it. And when he asked General Curtis LeMay, a very good friend of his, about it, General LeMay turned to Senator Goldwater, who was an Air Force Reserve general, and said, Barry, if you ever ask me about this again, I will personally see that you are court-martialed out of the Air Force Reserves. He says, I can't, and because Barry Goldwater, Senator Goldwater said, I want to get into the blue room at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base where the ET materials were sent. And Curtis LeMay said, General LeMay said, he said, God damn it, I can't even get into that area anymore, and you better not ever ask me about this again. And put the fear of God in Senator Goldwater. So I think that this is, you know, if I had heard this from one senior leader of our country or from one person overseas in Great Britain or other countries, but I've heard this, it's over and over and over and over again. And believe me, it's been one of the most traumatic things of my life to realize that all these emperors have no clothes. And, you know, we're sitting here, our butts hanging out naked in the wind because this whole thing has gotten so out of control that no one knows how to rein it in. And this is why it has to be us, we the people, and those who are in these projects defecting under the cover of a legal umbrella that we have created. And we created this legal umbrella by notifying every agency in the U.S. government and stating that these operations are illegal, and unless we are notified otherwise, we're going to bring forward documents that are top secret, testimony that's classified, and that all of this is legal to do because the projects themselves are criminal. And we were never corrected. I mean, this went out in 97, 98, and to this day, I have never heard from any official in the U.S. government saying you are wrong. So people who are listening, who have been in these projects, need to reach out to us and come forward in a new wave of bringing this information out. And it isn't to create trouble. It's to create a massively dysfunctional crisis in our to correct this dysfunction, but also to lay the foundation for the people and the people's representatives getting this back under control. Not only in terms of relations with these visitors, but also with what's going on with the science and technology end of it. And it may be that, you know, right off the bat we can't bring out, you know, interstellar level of technology or things that are anti-gravity that can go from here to Baghdad in 2 or 3 minutes, because, I mean, obviously that's a delivery system for a missile as well. But we can certainly bring out the energy generation component of it. So every car has a free energy electric motor. So every home has a heat pump type system, but that it's actually generating electricity. You get off the grid. so that we shut down all the coal-fired power plants, et cetera, and so on and so forth. I call that phase one of the technology disclosure. And, it's funny, I was just talking to a man just before this show about getting me together with a group of 30 billionaires on an island in the Caribbean next week to talk about this. And I said, well, do you think...
And will Dr. J be there, I assume?
At the end of this month.
Sorry, I couldn't resist.
No.
Oh.
Well, no, I mean, I get invited to these kind of crazy things all the time.
Yeah.
But, but the question I had to my contact to this group was, well, is there anyone there who would have the courage to go forward with any of this? Because if they don't have the courage, it doesn't matter.
You're right. That's right.
And here, everyone is asking, why hasn't this happened? I always tell people, it isn't that the evidence isn't there. It isn't that the science isn't there. It isn't that the documentation isn't there. I've got a disc with thousands of pages of confiscated, by the CIA, confiscated technology patents with their plans on it. You got to have a lab. You got to have funding. Who wants to put that in? Now we were hoping the Sirius film would generate enough revenue we could do that. It didn't. Maybe this next one will, or maybe someone listening will have the resources to do it. But ultimately,
I think a lot of revenge would be extracted on anyone who was a whistleblower. I really think it'd be
a lot of
heavy.
revenge, and I think that yes, it is. And here's the other problem. I was meeting with a billionaire out here in Hot Springs, Virginia. He had his personal income was around $750 million a year. And he said, I was friends with a senior executive at General Motors in the late 60s who told me they had these technologies in a classified part of GM. And he thought it was time to bring it out. So every GM car, this was in 68 or 69, would be a free energy electric car. But 2 weeks later, this executive was found dead. I said, yeah, but that was the 60s. He says, yes. But he says he had five private jets, and occasionally he let me use one. And he said, my grandkids ride around on these private jets. Do you know how easy it may be for them to knock one of them out of the sky? I said, sir, I don't think that's going to happen. If you provide the funding, I'll take the heat. He says, no, I'm not willing to risk it. So there are enough people who have seen the ugly side of this suppression, and it is real. This is not a conspiracy theory. So I tell people it isn't about money. In Silicon Valley, they're minting a new billionaire every week out there. All the unicorns. It's about finding someone who has the courage to do something with those funds. Besides another app.
I agree.
And so I've
seen the government at work. I've seen government extract its revenge. Just punish people and sue them left and right and center over minor details and just making things up just to drive them into the ground, to alienate them from their family and friends. Or their friends will abandon them. They don't want anything to do with that type of thing.
That's right.
And Dr. B, I wanted to thank Dr. J for letting me have this lengthy conversation. Just excellent.
Yeah, no, that's great.
So
it's wonderful. It's a wonderful focus, and again, anyone who can come forward who can help with details and information on this, we encourage them to reach out to us, and really anyone also who can provide support for the research and development and release of these technologies. I'm confident that we could do it if we had the backing and the resources to do it. But it takes people who are going to do it. So either the public has to, come together and support it, or there have to be some sort of angel funders who want to do it, notwithstanding the risk profile of it. And I will say that getting the information out, it hasn't been that hard. The number of people I've been able to reach through the internet and stuff exceeds the nightly viewership on CNN.
That's right.
The problem is, it does. The problem is getting people to actually take the information to the next step and take action. And so this is where I tell people you need to form your own CE5 contact groups. You need to find witnesses. Those of you who live in California, network with people up near Palmdale and Lancaster and the Edwards complexes. There are lots of people out there who are working on this stuff who need to come forward.
Before I go, could you? I'll take this off the air, if Dr. J.
Yeah, go ahead, Luke, because we got a few more callers.
Okay. at the end of the show or at some point, again, go over what's happening at the end of the month. I kind of
Yeah,
missed that.
yeah.
Sure, maybe a little more detail.
I was
Well,
going to
thank you,
say,
Dr. J.
Dr. Greer, if it's okay, since we already kind of passed that time, do you mind skipping the break since we got so many people interested in talking to you or what you have to say?
Sure. No. Yeah, we can. We can just
Okay,
push on through.
let's do that. We do have two
night,
more
Ben.
callers. Thank you so much for calling, Lou. Well, before I bring them, Jason, you hang tight. I know you've been patient, and then 951, please hang tight. Dr. Greer, if you just want to go ahead and finish Lou's thing, because I was going to use the time after the break to talk about the event again, and we'll do it again before the show ends. Why don't you just briefly, one more time for those who may have joined us a little bit late and missed the initial question about the event that's coming on. And then, of course, I'm going to bring on these callers that are waiting.
Well, yeah, there are a couple of events. I'm going to be at the Conscious Life Expo at the LAX Hilton on the. I'm going to be presenting on the 21st, Sunday the 21st. That'll be a webinar as well as a live lecture if people want to come in person. But then we're doing a weekend, the 26th of February, 27th and 28th, up near Palm Springs at a hot springs. We're going to be there presenting all the information related to the science of consciousness, the meditation techniques, remote viewing, contact, and also the physics behind transdimensional phenomenon. And I didn't mention this before, Dr. J, that this is really important. You're sitting out under the stars with a group of people, and all of a sudden there is an electronic tone that comes out of thin air that goes all around the circle and begins to then interact with one of your electronic devices, making a series of repeated technological tones. It's transdimensional electronic communication that's interstellar. This has happened hundreds of times. So there's so much phenomenon that I normally don't get a chance to present to people unless they come out for an entire week with
That's
me
right.
under the stars.
The week-long seminars, you do the 6-day ones, right?
Yes, but those are limited to 25 people, and they fill up within 1 or 2 days.
Yeah, I remember the last time we were trying to promote it, but we couldn't because by the time the show was over, it was already filled up, literally.
Yeah, but see, this event where we're just going to be, it'll be an indoor event, but then people can go out at night on their own, and in the mornings they're going to have off the practice and also be out in the hot springs and what have you. This particular weekend we'll be able to hold a much larger number of people and really take people through the training process, not only of the meditation techniques, but also the techniques for getting into the ability to do really accurate remote viewing, and then how that's used for ET contact, and then how to form your contact teams. And then on Saturday night, we're going to present a whole bunch of images and tones and other phenomena that have happened, and I'm going to do a very in-depth explanation of how those events happen, what they mean, and what to look for. Because, everyone thinks it's going to be like a science fiction movie where a flying saucer lands on top of your head. In reality, that's the least likely that an ET civilization is going to interact with you. They're going to do things that Dr. J. Allen Hynek, a Project Blue Book, used to call high strangeness. Mm-hmm. So this is very important for people to understand the way that interstellar civilizations might interface with your environment, your technology, your cell phone, your magnetic field detector, in sound, in light,
and also sixth sense, because a lot of times you have people in the audience that I've witnessed firsthand talking about how they felt or with their eyes closed while meditating. Experienced is a word I hear a lot of people after.
And they'll experience the same thing, and it'll be different people.
Yes.
Who will get the same information. And that also, one time we were up on Mount Shasta, and there was this really strange electronic tone that came out of omnidirectional space above us in the middle of the national forest. Everyone heard it. But we were in the middle of a meditation where I was guiding people into going into interstellar space, contacting these civilizations, and it was a very deep, quiet meditation. And at that instant that everyone heard this tone with their physical ears, within their minds, like a visualization, everyone saw the same kind of pearl gray sphere float from one direction of the circle that we had formed through the circle out the other side and off into space.
Yes.
But they saw it in their mind, but they heard it. So this gets into the whole question of how tonality and frequency can be a carrier wave for transdimensional objects and forms. And it's a very interesting discussion of the ancient Vedic understanding of what's called name and form. Sound and tonality then creating form in transdimensional reality that then can emerge into 3D physical space-time. And the understanding of that is really, really important, because now you're getting very close to an understanding of manifestation, materialization, teleportation, transportation that is interstellar. Because it can't be linear. You can't go from one star system or galaxy to here at the speed of light or less in a straight line. So this understanding, which a lot of people have ridiculed me for talking about this stuff, but this understanding is really the heart of being able to understand the entire UFO and ET phenomenon. If you don't understand it, you're going to miss 99% of it. And mostly what you're going to understand are the things our secret government are making that look like flying saucers, but they're made by Lockheed Martin. And
ARVs, exactly what we were talking about at the beginning.
ARVs they mentioned in the X-Files,
yes.
Which is not a term I coined. I got it from a guy who worked in the intelligence community.
But yet no other researcher revolutionary in this field has ever used that term except you, which is, I know you got it from your work and from the briefings that you've had with the CIA director and all these scores. It's not even dozens, it's scores. I believe you had, what was it, close to 200, or was it 200 hours witnesses at the Disclosure Project? Not that actually attended, I'm talking about that came forward and you were able to film.
Yeah, we have over 100, and we hope to get another 100 if people come forward for this next expose. And I think that this is the other thing is, if you go to our YouTube channel, I think we have 5 or 6 dozen of these people's testimony up there.
That's
but
right.
Remember, those are only little clips of them. The actual interviews are 1 or 2 hours each for over 100 of these people. But no one's going to look at 200. I mean, one of the problems is that I have so much stuff. But we want to get newer whistleblowers, but also ones deeper and more current. And that the more that come forward, the better. It's safety in numbers. It's credibility in numbers. And this is the year to make that happen. And I think that, we may, in fact, crowdfund this next film, and if we do, we're going to be calling on everyone to help us. I'm talking to some other people. It isn't hard to get a thing like this funded through various investors or media pump. But here's the problem, Dr. J. If those people then begin calling the shots of what goes in and out, and we don't want it to get corrupted, so we may again turn to the public and say, hey, you want to support this? You can do this through crowdfunding, and you'll get a copy of the DVD or a video of it, or come to the premiere.
Or even get credit. Like you had several people, I remember, that donated a certain amount, because I was at the premiere, 2013, I believe, or end of 2012.
No, it was
April.
Yeah, it was less than 3 years ago. Yeah, I didn't know you were there.
Yeah.
Well, there were 1,300 people at that premiere.
That's right.
So there are different ways we're looking at doing this. I have to tell you, none of it's been settled yet. It will be settled in the next month or so.
Well,
and
I'm actually
when I'm out in L.A., look, if there's anyone listening who thinks they can help with that production, help with supporting it, help with getting the word out when it's finished, whatever, contact me, because, it's not like I go back and forth from the East Coast to the West Coast every day.
That's right.
So I'll be out there for 10 or 12 days. So anyone who thinks they can, can reach out to Dr. J or contact us at our website, SeriousDisclosure.com. And we want to launch this this year and really move the ball forward for the people's disclosure. Because, again, there are a lot of people who think, oh, well, if we make enough noise, someone in Congress will hold a hearing. That I doubt.
Yes.
But be honest with you. But, however, if there's enough people who come forward with information and enough people support getting a film out so there's a way to get it out to the masses, we become the government of we the people, doing the disclosure ourselves. This is something that most people are astonished when they hear this. I said, no, I'm not asking. I mean, it'd be great if the next president or the next chairman of the Senate Intelligence Committee held an open and honest hearing on this, but why don't we do this ourselves? This is a country of we the people. We're the people who rose up and overthrew the King of England, for God's sakes.
That's right.
So why don't we do this ourselves? Are we totally without wit and power? No. If we come together as a group, we can do this ourselves. And so I've always maintained, from 1993 until 2000, I gave the Congress and the UN and other governments and the president a chance. They dropped the ball. They wouldn't do it, so that's why we did it ourselves. Now we need to keep that going, while at the same time we create more and more expert teams who have mastered the science of consciousness and contact to become ambassadors from Earth to these civilizations, which then will bypass the secret government completely. So, all this is about empowering ourselves to do this without fear. And if we do it in a group of people who are supportive, we can do it, and it will be amazing what progress we make. Because really, if you look over the last 20 years, when I first got involved with this stuff, there was only about a third of the public or less who thought any of this was real. Now it's 50, 60%.
That's right.
And when I first started out, the so-called magic group, the secret committee that deals with this, there's only about a third of them that supported in the secrecy. I'm told now it's about 70%. There has been enormous progress, and is it as fast as I would like? No. But at the same time, this is an ultra marathon, not a sprint.
Yes.
And as I've gotten older, when I was in my mid-30s and started this, I wanted it all done within 18 months. But now I have to accept the fact that this is turning the direction of our planet from one path it's been on for thousands of years of endless war onto another path. And this is a once in every 500,000 year event we're talking about. So what's 30 years over that time period, or 20 years? So I think we have to take the long view, but at the same time have a sense of urgency, because the Earth really is getting completely destroyed by the way we're living so stupidly on it. And we can do better than that for our children. And, I have 8 grandchildren now. I mean, it's hard to imagine. But people say, you must be the gnarliest grandfather ever. But, it's like we don't have time to just let this run its course with a bunch of buffoons in Washington or the secret government coming around and deciding they're going to do it. I think the people have to have sort of our own rising up. Not in a violent way.
A revolution,
but
peaceful.
It really is a revolution.
Yes.
It's a revolution that needn't be violent, but it will be very transformative. And yes, it will disrupt certain entrenched special interests. But you know what? Too bad. Those folks who are on the top of the petrodollar military-industrial oil complex have had a very nice ride for 100-some years. It's time for us another generation to take over and move the planet in a different direction.
I'm glad you said that. I'm going to make a couple quick comments because we have a lot of listeners, 3 on the queue, plus another one, and then we have a bunch of listener questions. I'm so glad first of all, you coined the term petrodollar, because it couldn't be further from the darn truth. I mean, literally, they have controlled every aspect of humanity for well over a century, and what you're doing, this is why I support your cause so much, and I'm always willing to do whatever it takes to get it out there, is you are empowering the people. You're not going on stage and saying, you got to do it my way, you can't have results without me present. No, you teach people, move on to a city, teach them. My goal, as I would love to see one day just globally seeing people having a CE5 event day all across the board. Everybody in going to their local parks from every country that we have these people. And there's so much more to say that, but there's been some very patient people. I'm going to go to the first one. This is actually a Skype call, so I know the name. I don't know the city. And this is Jason Figueroa. Where are you calling from?
Hey, yeah, I'm calling from New York City.
Ah, yes, right where it is, 35 minutes to midnight. You have any questions or comments for Dr. Greer?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, I just wanted to, say I'm thankful to Dr. Greer. It's his work that kind of like put me in contact with the CE5 program.
Mm-hmm.
And I made contact with Kraft.
Let me say this real quick. Anybody who's on the line, if you guys can please mute the background, because there is a 30-second delay. You're not going to miss anything, I promise. Go ahead, Jason.
Okay, no, I actually followed his protocols, and I actually found a group in Long Island, and I made contact with Kraft, E.T. Kraft, back in June of last year. And from that experience, it changed my life completely.
Right. It's unbelievable.
Unbelievable. My question for you is, have you ever had an experience with one of your CE5 people, ambassadors, where you're seeing Kraft so often, especially in big cities like New York, where they come out even if you're not doing a CE5? I'll have experiences where I'll meditate in the house, and I'll walk out the door, and I'll have a Kraft in the sky, like literally right over New York City, right over Manhattan, or sometimes with the lights off, and you'll see little shadow orbs in the sky.
Right. Well, yes, and what happens is that part of it is that it may be only seen from one angle of view, and sometimes it can be seen by thousands of people, and sometimes not. Once you start doing this, it opens, let's call it a vector, a channel to these civilizations, and they will begin to appear. We've done this all over the world where we'll take our team, go there, we'll have events happen after we leave. It'll continue to go on and on and on and on. And this is part of the phenomenon that has to do with the structure of space-time and consciousness. It gets into a very esoteric discussion, but what comes first, the field of consciousness or space-time and matter? Well, it's the field of consciousness. Primacy is with consciousness. So these civilizations understand this really well, and once, let's say, an area is enlivened and people are doing this, people begin to see them who aren't even related to your group. The other thing that happens is that people who are doing these protocols will be, someone 10 feet away may not see it, but someone standing right where you are will, because we think of space as very linear, and that if it's something that's fully materialized, yes, but what if something is only quasi in this dimension and quasi in another, partially in this dimension, partially not? It may be only seen from one angle or from one perspective, even though it's really there. So it's not that it's cloaked to other people. It has to do with the angular momentum of the craft or the person or the whatever the technology is, and how it begins to fold or enfold within space-time. So there's so many different ways that the phenomenon happens, and that's why, I'm going to try to go through as much of this as I can over this entire weekend, because it will answer a great many questions of experiences people have had that seem to be completely mystifying. But
right, and I noticed too that like if I have someone next to me, they can see the craft if they're in my view, but it presents itself in a way that you would think that disclosure is literally happening that day, because they're just right in the middle of the
Dr. Greer, before you answer that, I have something similar, so you might as well answer both at the same time. Exactly what Jason asked, but also I have an interesting case that, Preston Dennett very well, who researched, he's done a lot of great research. There was a woman who was on a subway, and she had been a contactee, and she had noticed right there in front of her was an extraterrestrial. Yet everybody around while riding the subway in New York City was sitting there reading their paper. Whatever they were, they weren't paying attention. They got to the next stop. People got in front of this being and her, and the next thing was gone. She wasn't dreaming. She was, her head's together. She's been, contacted throughout her life. But why was it that instance? Nobody can see this, but she could. And this goes along with what Jason was saying, where he'll meditate and he'll go outside. This craft will be there where thousands may not be seeing it, yet it's right there.
Right. Well, this has to do with the state of the consciousness of the person and the beings that want to contact them, and how much they want to be known by everyone else, or would be concerned that it might create turmoil.
Yes.
And this is why a lot of people, I remember Larry King saying, why don't they land on the White House lawn? Why all this cloak and dagger stuff? People get frustrated with it. I said, because they're not stupid.
Yes.
They're not going to do something that induces a sort of a panic, or that could give a lot of people a reason to say that there's some sort of an invasion going on.
That's
because
right.
they know that that's what's been primed in our society, is to have this sort of false flag invasion scenario that was concocted in the 50s. So they can appear to a very specific person or a group of people and then not be seen. I'll tell you a story that this strange credulity, what I'm about to tell you. We were in England at an old fort, and we were doing our CE5. We'd go there. Well, it turned out that night there were like hundreds of people there enacting different battles that had happened over the years in England and other places. It was just the strangest thing. So we went to this area that was as private as it could be. There were people all over the place, but we had no other place to go that night. And in a cloud came over. It stopped. It stayed there for 2.5 hours, and in the cloud was a craft that would spin around, light up, and dim down, and was interacting with us for over 2.5 hours, and no one else saw it, even though there were 15, 20 people on our team who were there watching it the whole night. Then when we were getting ready to leave, we got up and left, and people looked through us and couldn't see us. It was as if we were physically there, but we were invisible to all the people who were there. We walked right through all these people on our way out at 1 a.m. And this is like the phenomenon that happens is you say, well, were we cloaked, or were these other people in a fugue state, or what was going on? And some of these stories, if I were to tell people more than 10% of the kind of admittedly bizarre things that have happened when we've been out doing this, they would think that you have to be making it up. Actually, the last book I put out a couple years ago, which is Extraterrestrial Contact, Countdown to Transformation, goes through hundreds of these kind of accounts and what is actually happening. I really recommend people interested in this phenomenon get it. They can get this book at our website, SeriousDisclosure.com. And it actually comes with a DVD of a lot of the images of the things that have happened around us, because it begins to explain that if you're dealing with civilizations that don't have to stay locked into a material 3D paradigm, their technologies can move them across dimensions, the kind of phenomenon that can happen, there's really no end to it. So almost anything you can imagine they can do. And it's one of these things where the more you go, the deeper you go into this and begin to experience it, you go from astonishment to astonishment to astonishment. And that's the thing that keeps me going. It's so endlessly fascinating and really beautiful, the way it can unfold. And it's not at all what's being taught at UFO conferences. It's so much more nuanced and extraordinary. And I use the word complex not in a negative way, but something that requires multi-dimensional levels of thinking and understanding, because everyone wants to cram these interstellar extraterrestrial beings and their civilizations into our linear 20th century or early 21st century box.
Well, which you can't do, though, because, see,
you can't do it.
Words are two-dimensional thoughts.
It's axiomatic that if they're actually, well, it's like Arthur C. Clarke said, any civilization sufficiently advanced, all their technology will look like magic to us.
Yes.
And I think that's why a lot of people confuse the extraterrestrial activity as angels and demons and things like that, because of the fact that they're so nonlinear.
Yes.
Right. And also that it can be something that does legitimately cross over into these other phenomenon. And if you don't have discernment, and I have to say, sometimes with all the years, I mean, I've been having these experiences honestly, since I was a child.
Yeah, right after your near-death experience was when you
even
really...
before that. When
gotcha.
It's like when I was 8, 9, 10, I had a sighting, and then I would go to bed, and I would awaken in my room, and there were these beings there, and I didn't know what the world they were doing. So my experience with this goes back to 1963 or something when I was a child. And so I think that this is, and even with all that, almost every time we go out and do this for a week under the stars, something happens I have never seen before, even though I've done this for thousands and thousands of hours. What that says to me is that they're trying to stretch our minds. They're trying to introduce realities and consciousness and understanding of the universe that takes us beyond, sort of what is this sort of 3D linear box that we try to cram our reality into. Yes. And that's, I think, one of the bigger meta messages, overarching messages of the ETs is that they're trying to sort of expand our paradigm into something that will begin to comprehend the reality of becoming interstellar.
Dr. Greer, we got the calls piling up. I want to say thank you, Jason, and by all means, feel free to join us again, and always spread the word. Remember, everybody out there listening and participating, disclosure is in your hands. Dr. Greer has done a job better than anybody else I can think of, or in history ever, to restore the power to you, the people, to take this in your hands. We got several callers.
Thanks, Dr. J.
Thank you.
Thanks, Dr. Greer, and appreciate everything. And
of course.
all the good work that you guys do.
Before I go on to this next caller real quick, Dr. Greer, bringing up false flags, this is something important because this was a written question that was received before the show when people knew you were coming on. I recently had on Lieutenant Colonel Dr. Michael Aquino, PhD, who's got who sticks out of history for his controversial, religious path in the 69 through 75, but that's not what I brought him on for. He was, of course, lieutenant colonel an officer. He joined as an officer because he was college. We went to the same school. He got his PhD where I got my bachelor's and moved on to go to law school from UCSB. The point is, he doesn't believe in these conspiracies that we talk about. However, being someone who taught at the U.S. Army JFK School of Warfare PsyOps Division, he is 110% convinced that on 9/11, bin Laden had been dead for at least a year. Do you think that has any merit to that? Because he was very sincere with when he was speaking about that and very passionate about that.
I honestly don't know that. I mean, and I have no one that I've spoken to that could confirm that. Yeah. So I honestly do not know.
Okay. Well, that question, so for you listener out there who got that, I hope that was insufficient for you, but we got it for you. Nonetheless, we got several more, Dr. Greer. We might end up going over a couple if that's okay with you. Let's go to 951. Where are you calling from? What's your name?
I'm calling from SoCal, Dr. J. It's
Dan. Dan, you go by @DonDanel, right?
@DonDanel.
That's right. I'm going to actually let you ask the question that that I had here written from you. Go ahead and ask that. Whatever else you want to ask to Dr. Greer.
Well, I actually had another question, but I'd love to get your take on the what is your thought about the ELF waves and brain waves? And the smart technology using these ELF waves, is this mind control in pretty little plastic cases, and selling it to us for for our own sake?
Well, I don't know about that. There certainly are technologies that are radionic, psychotronic, that are very advanced electronic systems that use types of electromagnetic fields to affect awareness, consciousness, what have you. And these have been developed for decades. There's no question that they've used in warfare systems as well. And, of course, Tom Bearden and others have done a lot to expose some of these. Mm-hmm. But I've worked with there was a woman who worked with one defense contractor, an electronics company, that I got to know quite well, very legitimate, that said, look, we have equipment that are electromagnetic, that are trans-dimensional, that are scalar, or longitudinal.
Yes.
Not way beyond ELF. where we can turn a dial one way and have a group of people come into complete agreement and harmony who are having a meeting, turn it the other way, and everyone's fighting with each other over everything. And that sounds like science fiction. It is not. So I don't know. I mean, people will take this kind of thing and then extrapolate it to every electronic device you have. I honestly can't. That's a bridge too far. But are there classified projects and technologies that have this effect on awareness, on mind, on thought that is in the electromagnetic spectrum? Yes, and this has been around for more than 50 years, certainly more than 50 years, and has gone through various stages of refinement. And these sort of electronic warfare systems are used very actively on this issue for not only disinformation, but also disrupting efforts. So this gets into this whole question of, if you're going to be an ambassador of these civilizations, you need to transcend all that nonsense. How do you do that? By the fine mastery of your own conscious mind and thought. So that you can do, because whatever these technologies are, they're nowhere near as powerful as what is inside each of us.
Your own brain. Exactly.
Well, not your brain. Your own mind and higher consciousness, which the brain is only an outward manifestation of. So, again, primacy belongs to consciousness, not the other, not to the 3D.
I absolutely agree. Now,
so if you understand that, then you can kind of subvert or transcend the effect of any of these things. But I will tell you that Werner von Braun, who of course invented the V-2 rocket for Adolf Hitler, before he died, he not only talked about the false flag staging of a threat from outer space, which he said was
and the terrorists, because you worked with Carol Rosin, she worked with von Braun.
Yes, and what's interesting, we came out with all that information before 9/11.
That's right. That's right. And
so that was very well known, and that's in the historic public record. But what I was getting ready to say, germane to your question, is that he said the only thing more dangerous than these maniacal, Machiavellian, crazy people trying to stage an alien false flag threat is the use of and abuse of these types of electronic warfare systems that are so-called psychotronic and radionic. And he was saying that those were very well developed and very effective at influencing people's awareness and thoughts and behaviors. So he actually said that was more dangerous than even the false flag thing, but that he didn't really want to go into it any further. So this gets into the thing where people, it's another subject of ridicule in the mainstream. And part of it is that people take it too far, where everything that happens, someone's doing it. I mean, so people, it's like any jet that goes over that leaves a contrail, it's a chemtrail. Well, no,
yeah.
I mean, so, everyone takes things to the ridiculous extreme. So what I would say is that, yes, but. So the things you really need to be concerned about, as I understand it, are the ones that are very well developed, scalar or longitudinal psychotronic radionic systems, which have been developed over the last 50, 60 years and have been used to create all kinds of mischief and disharmony and disruption and what have you, and that they're incredibly accurate and well-tuned. When I learned in the 1990s that this particular one person who had been in a company that was tasked with targeting different people and groups to create disharmony or disruption or to influence them, the level of precision that they had was astonishing to me. And this was even though I had met with people at the CIA and also the National Security Agency who had told me a great deal about this. So those things are not an urban myth, and it's another reason why, when I make the statement, a lot of times I don't have time to go into the reasons behind it. It is an act of patriotism, and it's a duty to the future of humanity,
Yes.
for people inside these projects to come forward and expose what's going on, because the public are sitting ducks. And our planet is, and our society and our culture is being run into the ground by folks who would love nothing better than an apocalyptic sort of crescendo of this chapter in human history. So to divert ourselves off of a path of annihilation into a path of interstellar future that'll go on for hundreds of thousands of years is no small task, but it can happen very quickly if enough people become aware of it and move together as one. And that's really what, the whole purpose, the reason I left emergency medicine, saving lives, one or two or three people at a time, was because when I realized what was at stake with this, it kind of overtook my understanding of what I can do as a physician saving the life of someone who just was in a head-on collision on the freeway. So I think that's where people have to understand that this is not just infotainment and fascinating. It's really about the future of our civilization and our planet, that this be exposed, but also that the same technologies that can do these terrible things can heal.
Yes.
They can cure cancer. They can cure AIDS. They can mend spinal columns that have been severed, literally. The same technologies that can be used for warfare and for disruption can be used to heal the entire planet's biosphere and give us a civilization that is amazingly high-tech but also peaceful. This is really what the choice is.
Yes.
This is the choice. And the more people understand that is what is at stake here, and that it is such a large issue that the likelihood that a bunch of lawyers, and no offense to Dr. J, and politicians up on Capitol Hill are going to deal with this, believe me, I think it'd be great if they did. But I think that we, the people, are going to have to really make this happen. And by coming together for doing the disclosure, for the contact, and exposing this nonsense, but also not just the negativity of that, but for the purpose of taking these swords and making them into plowshares. Because every single one of these technologies can be used for very, very beneficial purposes if they are bent to the good, to the use of the good. So what is critical here is the consciousness that wields it.
Yes.
Okay, and the intent behind it. And most people are not sociopaths like the folks who are running these covert programs. So we have a very, very small percentage of our population running amok. And why can't the rest of us create a different reality? That's my whole point. And it isn't about doing anything against them. It's about us coming together and making it happen for ourselves. So it's all positivity. And now in the meanwhile, you have to be aware of these sociopathic nuts. I mean, you ignore someone like Hitler at your own peril. But at the same time, and make no mistake, these folks are Hitlerian. In fact, I mean, they're worse even. But they aren't all powerful. And I always tell people, never think that this is some kind of defeatist thing that I'm saying here.
Yes.
That somehow these technologies and these groups are so powerful that it's just hopeless. I wouldn't be doing this if it was hopeless. I think it's actually the other way around.
Hopeful.
They're headed for the scrap heap of
Yes.
history. If we could just get our act together, the rest of us.
I want to get as much of these questions in, Dr. Greer. So,
Sure,
Dan the
take
man,
another one.
Yeah,
thank you so much.
I just wanted to get your take on our newest neighbor, our 10th planet, that's
Right.
10 times the size of Earth, and what a people would look like that comes from there. And I'll take it off the air. Thank you, Dr.
Thank
J.
you, Dan.
I appreciate your tenacity, Dr. Greer.
Yes,
Right.
and that's
well,
why.
To be honest with you, I don't know anything. I mean, I know what you've heard about this planet, the 10th planet, or 9th if you don't count Pluto. But, it's so far out there, and it's so cold, it's unlikely to host life as we know it. Now, with that said, it certainly could be an outpost of advanced civilizations that can control their own environment. And I've pointed this out about even Mars, where people say, oh, it's too cold now, it's moved out of the Goldilocks zone, which may be true. but it doesn't mean that there aren't resources there. And in fact, the head of Army Intelligence in the 1990s said that they had detected underneath the surface of Mars operational extraterrestrial facilities. And of course, there are very ancient structures there. So who knows what's on that planet way out there, billions of miles away.
Let me get some of this as much as I can. And we have 2 callers, and then we have some written questions. So briefly, I know this area code because I have a family member who lives near the Air Force Academy. So 719, am I right? Are you calling? You're there?
That's me here in snowy Colorado Springs.
What's your name again?
This is Kevin.
That's right, Kevin. It's a pleasure to have you. Sorry to push so much time pressure on you. I just want to get as much as we can before time is out. You have any questions or comments you'd like to ask?
Yeah, and I'm sorry this is so basic a question, Dr. Greer, but why do I need to meditate in order to contact with the ETs? And I'm not asking this derisively. I'm wanting your take on, because I hear you with the consciousness, and I worked a lot on.
Well, let me make a comment. People can have contact without learning the meditation protocols, but if you want to do it on a regular basis, you need to understand at least the paradigm that an interstellar civilization would be operating within, which is increasingly, and I'm going to make a prediction here, the big sciences of the next 1,000 years will be in the realm of the sciences related to consciousness and mind and the technologies that interface with them. So if you don't have an understanding of that and can't experience it, it's going to be very limited in how you can experience and understand these interstellar civilizations that are in the order of hundreds of thousands to millions of years more developed than we are. Remember, all the other technologies we've been talking about, zero-point energy, electromagnetic systems, so-called gravity control, those have all been on the planet and fully developed and operational within classified projects since before I was born, and I'm no spring chicken. So the real issue becomes you can certainly make contact or have a contact experience without learning meditation of these technologies. But if you want to be able to have an ongoing capability to be to communicate and be an ambassador from our civilization to their people, you at least have to understand consciousness, the structure of consciousness, how it is utilized, how it interfaces with communication systems that are interstellar, because they may have a thing that looks like a black iPhone, but they're thinking to it and turning it on. Now, even Zuckerberg of Facebook has said that he wants to study where the next level of technology would be something you think to your computer and it does what your interface.
I'm actually really glad you brought that up because
this is actually becoming more and more mainstream by people like Dr. Radin and others, and Dr. John at Princeton. And a lot of people think that, well, you have to have this ability in order to have any contact. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying that it greatly increases the yield and the likelihood of ongoing development of contact with these civilizations if you can experience and understand what consciousness is and how it operates and all these very important sciences that are related to consciousness. Now, certainly there are people who have had contact who have very little, if any, knowledge of that. But in terms of reproducibility and ongoing capability, it's very important to understand it. And besides which, it's very efficacious. It not only works, but it's also beneficial to you, because being able to enter into that state of consciousness not only enhances your life, lowers your blood pressure. I mean, there have been all these studies medically, but it also helps you in your day-to-day living. I can't tell you how many patients I had that came into the ER that I just had a deep, conscious, intuitive, and I could see the brain tumor, even though they had no symptoms.
Well, going back to what
I tell people, and you talk to the best pilots who are in the Air Force, there's a very high component of consciousness, intuitiveness, even precognition of what's around the corner. It's over the horizon sensing, in this sort of sixth sense. And it's been studied by the military. So, these are things that not only assist with the CE5 contact ongoing, but it also enhances your life generally and increases your ability to function. They've also done studies that doing this, people's IQs go up. Everyone's thought that your IQs are fixed. It is not fixed. So it's beneficial no matter what, but it also becomes really important. Now, I'm not going to say that unless you master this, you can't have contact. I would never say that. People have had contact for millennia who may or may not have understood and practiced any meditation techniques. However, if you want it to be really effective, and particularly with a group of people, where you want to go from one person having an idiosyncratic one-off experience to a group of people being a team to make contact, there needs to be that level of coherence. It greatly assists the contact potentiation.
Let me say this to you real quick, Dr. Greer. Thank you so much for calling, Kevin. I wish we had more time. Dr. Greer, thought-driven craft, and that's why I wanted to bring that up while you were on that topic, because I'm glad you mentioned that it's in the mainstream right now. They've been doing a lot of testing on what can be, we're on a binary level at this moment. If your brain waves are doing this thing, then it'll, do one thing. If your brain level is showing something else, it'll do the other. But actual extraterrestrial craft, before I get to the next caller, we once talked about the fact that these are driven by thought, and hence we could actually, instead of, let's just drop the speed.
Let's be very precise in our language. The guidance systems and navigation are thought interfaced. The propulsion system is more technological. Does this make sense to you?
Yes.
I just want to be really clear on the words. Driven by, someone might hear that and think you're talking about their propulsion system. Now, it's very well known. Everyone from Travis Walton and people who've had experiences who have been on craft have seen that there's an interface between the mind and thought and the bioelectric field of the occupants and the navigation and guidance systems. It's like, I tell people consciousness is the ultimate GPS, particularly when you're going transdimensional and across star systems and galaxies. So that gets into some, but again, it's not only consciousness. In one of the very early papers I wrote, and I recommend this, the first book that came out in the late 1990s that I wrote, that had a paper that dealt with consciousness-assisted technologies and technology-assisted consciousness. So in other words, you can have consciousness that assists a technological system, but you can also have a technology that augments and assists your own awareness and thought process. So these go back and forth, and the more developed a civilization becomes, by definition, if they're interstellar, they've had to master these other dimensions, and it's the key that is the universal key to these other dimensions is the aware state, the state of a quiet, conscious field of awareness from which everything is fluxing, moving in and out of reality, in and out of manifestation. So this understanding becomes not just some philosophy, but becomes an operational technological system. And that's what people need to understand, that when you're doing this and get into this, what's called non-locality in physics, the non-local mind that's kind of in an omnipresent field, you can then not only see but tie in with your intent and thought with the communication system of an interstellar vehicle or a person that's an interstellar being. And we may be doing it just with our own innate thought abilities. They have that also, very well developed, but they also have technologies that increase its efficiency and accuracy, which classified programs have. I won't go into it, but we don't need that. We can develop our own innate ability, and they're going to pick up on it. And that's why the CE5 initiative protocols work, is that it's not just because it's some kind of philosophy that's new agey and interesting. It's an operational system that is a requirement to be interstellar. Because if you're going faster than the speed of light, you're not going to be able to use electromagnetic signals, and you begin to cross into an increasingly conscious universe. So that beyond the speed of light, you start getting into what the mystics used to call the astral fields and the fields of thought forms and archetypes that Plato talked about. This gets into very important understanding. And this is what I'm going to spend the whole weekend explaining to people up near Palm Springs at the end of the month, so that people will get a deep understanding of this, but also begin to practice it and have experiences where it begins to make sense. It takes some time, but it's something that everyone can begin to do.
Dr. Greer, I wish we had more time. We have several written questions. Yeah, all you out there who have written and were patiently waiting for answers, I do apologize. Don't worry, Dr. Greer will come back. We always do our best to support in every endeavor, which is why when you go to our website, you will see the banner for the event, and you just click it, which will take you directly to SiriusDisclosure.com, SIRIUS Disclosure.com. Again, for all you people that I missed the opportunity to ask, don't worry, you will have another chance. Dr. Greer, it has been a true pleasure. If you could just hang by real quick after, I wanted to give you one last moment to give a final statement on whatever you say, and of course plug in the two events that are coming in at the end of this month.
Sure. Well, I really appreciate your help and everyone listening. If you want to join me in LA, I'll be there on February 21st at the LAX Hilton for the Conscious Life event, and then the following weekend, the 26th, 27th, 28th, I'll be up near Palm Springs in these hot springs. And if you can't join in person, both those events, the weekend as well as the presentation in LA, will be a webinar, and there's a link to that on our website. And the other thing is to ask for everyone's help with the concept of bringing out this next feature documentary film. And if you have evidence, if you have documents, if you are a witness or know of people who have been in the military, government, or Department of Defense contractor, aerospace contractor with information firsthand, please contact us. And we're going to probably be standing up that project here in the next 6 weeks or so.
And you guys all heard it here first. I know for the last at least year plus, a lot of you listeners have been reaching out to me to reach out to Dr. Greer about Sirius Part 2. You just heard the announcement. It is going to be under works. And for all you filmmakers, now is the time. With that being said, we'll see you tomorrow night, same place, same time. Dr. Greer, hang by. And if you guys need anything, go to drjradiolive.com and use the contact button.